That's not
vegetarian.
true. That's
Are you
actually
with me?
not. No, that's based on
Well, you
Funalytics.
can,
No, no.
maybe you can.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
no, so that. Let me finish
yeah, yeah,
my thought,
yeah,
and
yeah.
then
Okay,
you can
go
go
ahead.
on.
Yeah, go ahead.
But if a diet is lacking in specific essential nutrients like B12, but there are more, then that cannot be our evolved biologically appropriate diet.
That's not
Just
true.
that
I've provided evidence showing that that swap from red meat to plant protein is a beneficial one, and I haven't seen any argument against the data I've provided. If we can get all of our nutrition and it leads to better health outcomes, lower rates of cancer, lower risk of ischemic heart disease based on this meta-analysis, what's the problem? Depends what you mean. If you mean plant only, no supplementation, fortification, well then no, I'd say that's not adequate. I advocate for people to supplement appropriately. Obviously, the one that everyone is aware of is vitamin B12. And when we supplement appropriately and we look at populations who are doing that, we see that they do just fine. They have similar rates or similar nutrient status and rates of deficiency to omnivorous counterparts who are eating a lot more animal products. I mean, we see this out of some research. I'll just actually share my screen again real quick. Research out of Switzerland. I mean, there are a bunch of other papers as well that I could pull from, but I really like the one out of Switzerland because they looked at rates of deficiency as well. Where is it? Right here. And so if you're looking at omnivore vegans on the right, similar rates of low magnesium, similar rates of low hemoglobin, plasma ferritin, similar for zinc, similar for iodine. Mind you, everybody was low in iodine, presumably not having much like iodized salt or what have you, or fish in this population, or seaweed for people eating plants. Vitamin A was similar, beta carotene, vitamin E, C. Actually, for C, the omnivores tended to be a little bit higher as far as rates of deficiency, but that wasn't significant. B2, roughly similar. B6, actually the vegetarians were higher there, but the omnivores and vegans very similar. B12, no significant differences. Folic acid, actually the omnivores were lower. And actually, speaking of that, Michaela Peterson publicly acknowledged that her folate levels were low when she tested them, and so she started supplementing with that as well on a carnivore diet. But this all just comes back to what I was talking about before, is that like if we can get all of our nutrition with a plant-based diet plus appropriate supplementation, and it leads to better health outcomes, lower rates of cancer incidence based on this meta-analysis from 2017, lower risk of ischemic heart disease based on this meta-analysis from earlier this year, vegans compared to non-vegetarians. What's the problem? Why do we need to consume a diet that doesn't come with supplementation, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense when the health outcomes are suggesting that it is healthy, and again, that's what I care about. Maybe not everybody cares about the health outcomes, but that would be my kind of position or my response to that question.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Dr. Chaffee. What do you say about, can you get an adequate amount of nutrition from just a plant-based diet?
Yeah, well, I think that is an important point, and that if a diet is lacking in specific essential nutrients like B12, but there are more, then that cannot be our evolved biologically appropriate diet. And this doesn't even go into bioavailability of different nutrients, because there are quite a lot of nutrients that are locked up in ways that we can't access. There are traditional methods of releasing them, like nixtamalization in maize. It releases a lot of the nutrients like niacin and detoxifies them. This is where tamales come from, is that process of nixtamalization. And cooking and all these sorts of things can bring out these nutrients. But what does that mean? That means we are not designed to do it naturally ourselves. And so I think that inherently is important when we're talking about what we're supposed to eat. As far as just hopping back to the change, is it a bad thing that our brains are smaller? Well, I think it is, and I don't think that it's that you can say that it was a selection factor, because this was a hard line. It wasn't that it's gradually happened over the
like
course
one
of
generation
10,000.
or like how quickly did it happen?
A couple hundred years, yeah. Well, that's out of a book. That's out of a book from Oxford University, and they said before agriculture, directly after agriculture, these were the differences.
Well, sure, but like I want to know how long, right? If that's taking place over thousands of years, it could totally just be a selection event. It's not as advantageous, right? it was in a book somewhere. I mean, I just prefer to see,
Well, I'll bring
some
it up for
evidence.
you.
Yeah, please do. And like just to understand kind of how long that was, and if it, because the way that you're speaking about it, and maybe
that's the thing. So this doesn't say the time period that this does it. It just talked about just pre-agriculture and post-agriculture.
Yeah, because
but
agriculture
10,000 years ago. No, so
agriculture
it says
spreads over.
post-agriculture man 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, so I mean that's a fair amount of time. That's a lot of generations to pass down through, and as far as when that started and ended, and agriculture was introduced at different times in different places around the world.
So this is saying post-agricultural people 10,000 years ago.
Okay.
So not comparing us now to 10,000 years ago. It's comparing skeletons from 10,000 years ago to pre-agricultural man.
But to when? Like what part? Right? How long ago? Is that 100, 200,000 years ago pre-agricultural, or is it 12,000 years ago, right? 200,000? Yeah, so we need to know where that is, right? We can't just say, oh, it's a hard line, all of a sudden we see these changes happening in like a couple generations. We want to know, is that over many tens or hundreds of thousands of years? And so without seeing that, it's just really hard to buy that there was this hard line.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have the whole book handy. I only have this picture. You can see it here. And it's pre-agricultural man and post-agricultural man 10,000 years ago. And there was this sharp decline in height. And it goes through all the different sorts of issues in the skeletal deformations that they found. And so it doesn't say exactly when.
Yeah, it doesn't tell us when or how long. So I don't know how much of a.
I'm with you, but the what's being relayed here in that picture is this is like that this is a hard line. This is pre-agriculture. This is not 500,000 years ago. I'll try and find the book and send it to you, but that is what and see where it says specifically that. Unfortunately, I don't have that with me right now, but that is what that is suggesting, is that this is a direct hard line. But in any case, the idea that we are optimal on a diet that is lacking in basic nutrients, I don't think that follows. There was, certainly there can be an issue with folate. People with the MTHFR gene mutation don't methylate folate properly, and so they might need a little bit more. But generally what they do is they just eat more liver, and that takes care of it. And I have a number of patients who have done that and have improved on that, and they don't need to take the engineered supplements. They can still just eat meat. They just have to add in a bit of organs, and so they can still get complete nutrition that way. There's more than B12. There's D3, obviously. There's K2. You can get K1 from plants, but it doesn't convert very well over to K2, and you need K2. That's required, and it's actually found to be in poor dentition and jaw development if you have a lack of K2. Vitamin A in its whole form, retinol, does not exist in plants. You got to get it from the carotenoids like beta carotene, but you have to eat quite a lot of these things to get enough vitamin A, sometimes as much as 6 pounds of carrots. And there are about 45% of people that are hypo metabolizers of beta carotene. So it's very difficult for them to get vitamin A as well. Carnitine, this is considered a non-essential amino acid because we make it, but there's evidence that as much as 30% of people don't make enough, and they do need that from their diet as well. And then you're looking at amino acid balance and bioavailability. This again, you can get a complete protein, you certainly can, from plants, but it's not necessarily in the right proportions. And if I can find one of these studies that's looking at plant source proteins that was not so favorable, and it was much more favorable with animal source proteins, if I can find it here.
While you're looking that up, do you mind if I just mention a couple things?
Sure.
Yeah. So I want to talk about each of these, the K2, vitamin A, things that you just mentioned, but I want to understand this idea of like, well, if you need to supplement, then the diet's inferior or not as healthy or optimal, so to speak. let's just do a quick thought experiment. Let's say there's two diets, right? There's diet A, which provides everything that you need as far as essential nutrients, and then there's diet B, which provides most of what you need, but you do need to supplement a couple things. Two things, three things, whatever. It doesn't matter to me here. Now, diet B also, and let's say we didn't know this definitively, leads to better long-term health outcomes, lower risk of cardiovascular disease, cancers, all-cause mortality, etc. Which of those two diets would you choose?
Well, it depends on the evidence. But
For sake of the hypothetical, we have hard evidence. It meets every criteria that you need for causal inference.
But we don't, though.
No, but just hypothetically, we do. I'm trying to understand your values, right? And so, just in that hypothetical, if those are the two examples,
I don't think that follows. Because if you're biologically designed,
we're going right. That's the whole. The debate is about that, right? The debate is about which is ultimately healthier. I'm just trying to understand if it were the case. If I were to show you this, would you accept that, right? So, in these two situations, hell, they aren't even carnivore and vegan. Let's just throw those out for a second. They're unnamed diets. We know nothing about them other than what I just said. Diet A provides all of what you need, other than all of what you need as far as essential nutrients. Diet B provides most, but we have to supplement a few things, but it leads to better long-term health outcomes. Which of those two would you say is healthier, would you choose?
Well, I think it's still a false comparison.
No, it's really not a false. It's a hypothetical to understand your values, right? So let's just put it this way. Wait, hold on. I'm saying the evidence.
No, I'm answering your question.
You're not answering it.
I'm trying to answer your question right now. If
you're not answering
it, show me hard evidence that I was convinced of.
And it is in this hypothetical.
I would go with the most helpful one.
Okay,
so I would go with the most healthy one.
Okay, in the case
you could do that.
Yeah, so what that tells me is that what you care about are the health outcomes over things like whether or not you need to supplement, whether or not some things are biological diet, and so on. The health outcomes are the be-all, end-all above all of that. That's what that tells me. And so that brings us back to the health outcome data. You still haven't explained why it is the case that when we substitute red meat for plant protein sources, we see improvements in outcomes. You haven't been able to critique any of those studies so far, or explain to me why it is that vegans consistently do better than people following a diet, at least closer to what you're recommending in the case of omnivorous diets, more meat and dairy and whatnot. So that's ultimately.
I don't agree with your premise. I don't agree with that underlying premise.
No.
That, something that we're not biologically designed for is going to be more healthy and it's going to have better health outcomes.
But here's the thing: I've provided evidence that swap of red meat from even unprocessed red meat across different populations, different research groups, different study designs, including long-term randomized controlled trials, leads to better outcomes long-term. And
there are other studies that say the opposite.
But hold on. I'm happy to address all of those too. But what is the fundamental issue? Like, surely you're familiar with the Nurses' Health Study or Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. What are the inherent issues with that? Or better yet, what are the inherent issues with the Lyon Diet Heart Study, long-term RCT? Can you point out specific issues with either of those? Like methods.
That's not really the point. The point is that there's countervailing arguments and there's countervailing evidence.
There's countervailing evidence for smoking too.
None of these studies are perfect.
No, I'm not saying they are.
I'm not. Have flaws.
I'm wondering. I want to know what those flaws are, because here's the thing: those flaws need to ultimately apply to the studies I'm providing, but not to the studies that you're providing, in order to demonstrate that your studies are better.
See, the thing is that I haven't said that ever.
No. I know. I'm not saying
actually disparagingly towards the studies on my side as well.
I'm not
saying they're not perfect. They're not good. And so that's why I said we shouldn't be looking at those studies. We should be going to first principles. What are we biologically designed to eat?
No, but see, I'm arguing. So again, we're going back to you just acknowledged that what you care about are the outcomes, right? You said that is the be-all, end-all based on that hypothetical. That's what I care about too. I care about the people dying every day from cardiovascular disease, cancer, and so on. I don't care whether or not we have an adaptation to extract nutrition from a given food, right? I care about, at the end of the day, is this going to help people prevent, falling on their face from a heart attack? That's what I care about. And I've provided evidence showing that swap from red meat to plant protein is a beneficial one, and I haven't seen any argument against the data I've provided. That's what I want to know. Is there any flaw? Like, I've seen you say, and I can pull up the exact timestamp if you want, but I've seen you say you have to look at the methods of these studies to critique them. And if you want, I will pull that up. It's totally up to you.
I know what I said.
Yeah. So I'm asking you just to do that. right? To just critique methodologically. Surely you're familiar with, like I said, the Nurses Health Professionals follow-up. Surely you're familiar with Lyon Diet Heart, some of the most famous nutrition studies we have out there. So what are the issues with at least those? I'm not expecting you to go into everything I've presented.
Well, that's the thing. I didn't prepare for that. I haven't gone through those at the moment, so I couldn't give you a robust description of that. The thing is, we're disagreeing on the premise here.
No,
You're talking about a false premise. You're saying that
I'm not. See, that's
things,
no. I'm not. You're assuming that the adaptations lead to the outcome, but we've already established what you care about is the outcome. I also do. I don't agree that the adaptation leads to the outcome, and I'm providing counter evidence.
Why is that? What is your biological premise for that?
Because the health outcome data clearly shows us that this approach is better long term.
But there's plenty of other health outcome data that shows the opposite.
And in fact, I just want to point out something really quick here. If we go to this, because this is your lecture, right? So this is your lecture from Plants Are Trying to Kill You. If we go down to the references, we see, there's like podcasts, there's some YouTube videos and stuff, but here you say fiber causes colon disease. But when we open it up, it's a cross-sectional study of 2,000 people. Like, why are you using that sort of terminology for really low-quality observational research when you're discounting some of the, the Nurses Health Professionals follow-up, long-term RCTs, without actually providing a critique?
So, I'm using loose language. I can certainly change that because you're right. That wasn't a causative study.
Okay, I think that's a good
that
idea.
doesn't really change the fact that there was, 2,000 people that found that the only correlation between diverticulosis was increased levels of diverticulosis was increased fiber intake and increased bowel motions per week.
And it was cross-sectional, right? So it was a snapshot in time. It could be the case that people eating more fiber, people with diverticulosis were eating more fiber to try to treat that. In fact, we have a meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies where you look at fiber intake pre-diverticulosis, and fiber intake actually lowers risk of developing it. So that would be stronger evidence.
Yeah.
You have a temporal.
I don't know why they would go
because it's a common recommendation.
A high fiber diet.
It's a common recommendation.
No, it's actually not. It's actually the exact opposite. When I was doing general surgery, the recommendation was to go on a low residue diet.
For diverticulitis or for ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, yes. For diverticulosis.
And to protect.
That's not true.
They said stay away from seeds and fiber. I'm just telling you from my practice in my hospital. That is absolutely the recommendation.
But just going back to the whole point of that, it's like you're citing observational. You're claiming. You're correcting yourself. You wouldn't call it causal. That's great. But I still have not heard a critique for any of the data I presented, and it's these are very popular. Surely you come across them all the time. You cited the UK Biobank, which actually showed a reduction in all-cause mortality with higher vegetable intake, despite claiming it was no effect. I mean, you were talking about cardiovascular, you said no effect on cardiovascular disease, which was sure, but it's just weird to cite that, but not the all-cause mortality result. But at the end of the day, I have not heard a critique, but what I need to hear ultimately is a critique for any of the research I've presented.
I told you, if you want to do a critique sometime, we can go through it. I'm not prepared to do a critique at this point in time. I didn't receive your studies or anything like that. I couldn't go through them, and so I don't have a critique.
Yeah, and that was obviously Lauren was away, so that explains that.
Yeah,
but
that's
anyways,
fine. But the thing is that you're asking me to do something that I'm not prepared for, and so obviously that's not something that I can do in a well-reasoned way. The point is that there are other studies. There are studies that go counter to what you're saying. There are studies that suggest that that vegetarians are even less healthy and have a low quality life than meat eaters. There's a study with 100.
Can you cite one, please?
No? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys both a question as well?
Yeah,
that I'm genuinely just curious about.
Yeah.
Dr. Nagra, have you ever tried a carnivore-based diet?
No.
Dr. Chaffee,
I mean, I've eaten a meat-heavy diet, but no, I haven't eaten a carnivore diet specifically.
Okay. And Dr. Chaffee, have you ever tried a vegan-based diet?
I was eating mostly plants before I went carnivore. Yeah, and whole food plants like a lot of spinach and kale and broccoli. Never eat processed foods or sugars or carbs ever. Never ate any of that sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of meat? Like, I don't know, 100% of your
No, I
diet. How
didn't.
much
Not
was that?
much. No, I limited it. So when I was in Bangladesh doing humanitarian work, it really just wasn't available. There wasn't really much food available, and
Right.
so I ate what was available. And then when I got back, I was mostly plant-based, just eating predominantly greens like spinach and kale and broccoli. And I would eat some meat, very lean meat, and low amounts of it. And I was doing that for a couple months, didn't feel great at all. And then when I switched and got rid of the plants and started eating more meat and more fatty meat, my health radically changed. And so that's when got interested in this and started looking more in depth to that. But I've never eaten a processed food diet ever. I was a professional athlete for a number of years. I was always very careful about what went in my body, and that's what I see as well. You certainly see the people going from a processed food diet to this and improving, but you also see people that have been long-term vegans for a while, short or long-term, and having serious health detriment. There's like something like 84% of vegans and vegetarians.
That's not true. That's actually not. No, that's based on
Well,
Funalytics. No.
maybe you can.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, no, so that let me finish my
Yeah.
my thought.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
okay,
you
go
can,
ahead.
you can
Go
go
ahead.
on.
Yeah, go ahead.
But and that's fine because the thing is that I haven't really crunched those statistics. Those are just statistics that I've
It's
seen.
cited often.
So I'm
yes,
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's the thing. It's just. But either way, there was that statistic that says 84% was a survey based, and they said. Basically asked what your main reason for quitting a vegan vegetarian diet was, and the most common response was their health had suffered.
That's not
And
true either.
so,
That's
that
not
was in
true.
that study.
In the
Well,
Funalytics, it
in
was
the
not.
survey?
No, it was not in
Okay.
the. Yeah. So
Well,
it
fair
was
enough.
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, so
no,
that's fine.
go ahead.
But
Yeah.
either way, what I'm seeing is not a bunch of people leaving a processed food diet and improving. I'm certainly seeing that, but I'm also seeing people leaving a whole food plant-based diet and improving when they start adding back in meat. Not even if they go full carnivore, but just adding back in meat significantly helps their health, especially with autoimmune issues. Those
Right.
can be dramatically improved by getting rid of anything except meat. And I've seen people with Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, SLE put these things into remission. Hashimoto's, I have dozens of Hashimoto's patients. They all improve going on a meat-only diet, and a lot of them were plant-based. And so I don't think that it's just getting away from processed foods. There is a benefit to eating meat, and seemingly from reducing other things. And we can get into that when we talk about the whole, plants are trying to kill you thing. But yeah, you were going to say.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
look, we can look at anecdotes on either side. I mean, we see Paul Saladino started introducing plants after he didn't feel so good. Frank Tufano's off the carnivore diet and disparages the carnivore diet at this point. We have the carnivore kid. He had a scan, found out he had a lot of coronary artery blockage. I can't remember the exact percentage. You look at, for anybody watching this, go to Carnivore Cringe on Instagram and just look through all the posts of people struggling on the carnivore diet. Anecdotes are unreliable. We can point in any direction we want. We can look at Mark Hubb, the researcher from Kansas State University, went on the Twinkie diet. It was Twinkie and sweets, basically, like 80% of his diet. Lost weight, improved biomarkers, felt better. Of course, weight loss is going to help. And it's an elimination diet, just like a carnivore diet could be as well. And just like a plant-based diet could be as well, in either direction. These anecdotes don't tell us a lot. You can't control for other variables. You can't adjust for them properly. That's why looking at prospective cohorts that are well adjusted, like a couple that I've mentioned so far, are beneficial. Now, I do want to just mention, you said you were bringing up a study about vegetarians doing worse. I was wondering if you can bring that up.
Yep.
Or send it in the chat. Maybe I can pop it open on my end too. Actually, another anecdote that's always a funny one is Freddie Blum was like the oldest person in the world. He actually died a few years ago at like 120 or something. But he smoked every day. It's like you can find anecdotes for anything. So just not super reliable and don't really tell us much about how they would have been without it.
I'm not talking about individual anecdotes. I'm talking about hundreds of my patients and thousands of people.
I mean, I could say the same thing, right?
Well, I agree with you.
Yeah.
That you can improve your health in other ways. I'm not saying the only way is a carnivore diet, but I do think that meat is a very important part of a healthy diet. First and foremost, because you're getting adequate nutrition and you're not reliant on supplements, but also because you're eliminating out because you're eating that, you're getting in calories that are sort of working out other things that maybe aren't so good for you. You're getting very bioavailable protein in perfect proportions, right? So egg is considered a perfect protein because it has all the aminos you need in the right proportions, and that's also very important. And you're also getting fatty acids, which are important. We have essential fatty acids that you have to get that are very difficult to
like
get
alpha-linolenic
from
and
plant-based.
linoleic.
Yeah, well, so ALA, I know in Simon Hill's book, he talks about how you can convert ALA into DHA and EPA, but there are plenty of people like Professor Robert Lustig who says, no, you actually can't do that. And so I mean, that's not something I'm wholly versed in, but I'm just to say that there are disagreements in the literature that none of this is like, well, this is the
Yeah, I don't think we have the
proof.
perfect study on EPA DHA. I will grant that. I don't think we have the perfect study on EPA DHA, at least in populations that don't consume them yet. But while you're popping that study up, maybe if I just mention K2 and vitamin A quick, because you'd mentioned those. So yeah, for vitamin K2, are you familiar with the different types, MK7, MK4?
No, not particularly.
Okay,
No.
okay. So MK7 is so we produce both of these in our body. We convert K1. Also, the microbes in our gut produce some. So MK4 is the predominant type in animal foods, in meat, in cheeses, and whatnot. And we actually don't absorb it at dietary doses. So let's pop this open here. So at the types of doses we use in our diet, or that we would get in our diet, even consuming a fair amount, we have the MK4 at 420 micrograms, we have MK7 at 420 micrograms. The MK4 that is present in food does not contribute to vitamin K status. It didn't actually increase blood levels. And in order to absorb it, we need very, very high doses that are achieved pretty much exclusively through supplementation. MK7, on the other hand, is the type we find in natto, which is fermented soy, and we can actually absorb it from there. Now, it's not an essential nutrient because we do convert K1. Like I said, the microbes in our gut produce some K2 as well. But this idea that we're getting K2 from meat just doesn't follow because we don't even absorb it at those doses. Now, on top of that, just talking about vitamin A really quick. So if we look at the conversion of beta carotene to vitamin A, it's just taking a minute to load. We find that, where is it? There's a good figure in here that breaks them all down. Jesus, I don't know why it's so slow. It's slow because I got like a million things running right now, probably. Okay, so if we look at like fruits, green vegetables, let's take sweet potatoes. They're kind of right in the middle. In fact, I will take the most conservative estimate of a 13-to-1 conversion ratio. The conversion can range from about 1 to I think it's 3 or so to like a 1 to 27 roughly. But if we do it'd be a 3 to 1 to like a 27 to 1. If we go with a 13-to-1 ratio, if you have 60% impairment, so most people who have impaired vitamin A synthesis or beta carotene conversion, they have about a 55 to 70% impairment of conversion. To make enough vitamin A, all you'd have to do, if you had 60% impairment, let's say, is to eat literally 1 cup of mashed sweet potatoes in a day. Forget about all the other food you ate, and you've got enough vitamin A. If you had 80%, 70%, being extra generous, we're talking about, it was 80%. Sorry, I did the math a little while ago. If you had 80% conversion or impairment of conversion, you're talking about 2 cups of sweet potatoes in a day to meet your needs. It's nothing. It's so easy. And this goes back to the data I showed earlier looking at actual tissue levels and deficiency rates of these nutrients. We don't see higher rates of vitamin A deficiency amongst vegans. And if there was this crazy issue with us converting enough carotenoids, surely we would see huge deficiency rates, but we don't. So it just doesn't make any sense to make that claim. So K2
aren't those things looking at supplementation as well?
No, so
those things you're talking about, that when everyone had a pretty adequate nutritional status, those were all in people that were supplementing.
For
that was your point.
B12, for like B12 and fortified foods through B12, sure.
So but did that study only look at supplementation with B12 and no other supplements?
No, that particular study didn't. However, even if we look at people who have impairment, and I'll pull up another study if we want to go through it, where people actually have impairment and they're consuming vitamin A from various food sources, plant food sources with very little preformed, when they're consuming beta carotene with very little preformed vitamin A, we see that it actually improves their vitamin A status. And I'm not aware of any evidence of vitamin A deficiency amongst vegans, or at a higher rate at least than we see in omnivorous populations. Unless you have, I'd like to see that, but I'm still obviously waiting for that other study you had mentioned as well.
Yeah, but in those studies, you're looking at vegetarian, vegan populations that are not supplementing and they have normal vitamin A. Is that what you're saying?
No, so I'm looking at vegans and vegetarians in the general population. Vitamin A supplementation rates generally aren't super high, but I'm not aware of any studies on vegan or vegetarian populations being vitamin A deficient regardless. And this goes back to we can look at we can look back
that's
at
fine. I don't know of any
specific
specific ones to that degree as well. It's just pointing out that retinol doesn't exist in plants, and
Yeah,
some
and
people
we-
are
and we make
hyper-responders.
Yeah, and even in that case, right? Like I said, a cup of sweet potatoes for a 70% impairment to 2 cups for a 80% impairment, no
The
problem.
problem is too is that many of these plant-based foods, they're all fortified with vitamin A and vitamin D and all of these things as well. So it's hard to say if you're looking
Well,
at
no,
a
no,
general
no.
population.
We have
most people are
trials.
eating fortified foods.
No, we have studies of actually feeding beta carotene and improving status. We have studies in like children in India, for example. Yeah, and you feed beta carotene and they
Yeah.
improve their vitamin A status. So
No,
Yeah,
I don't doubt for a second that you can do that. I'm just saying that when you get people and that are hypo responders, that are hypo metabolizers of it, that they can run into problems. I'm not saying you can't get vitamin A
if you're eating
from
no
population.
carotene, basically, like if you're eating little to no beta carotene, like I said, it doesn't take much. If you exclude the rest of the diet, a cup of sweet potatoes in a 60%, in someone with 60% impairment, 2 cups in someone with 80% impairment, those are like 80% especially is beyond even what typically people who can't synthesize vitamin A you'd see.
It kind of sounds like the general kind of layout of this is that, Dr. Chaffee, you think that if a diet that somebody needs to eat needs to be supplemented, let's say with B12 or something else, how could that be correct? And what you're asserting, Dr. Nagra, is that it doesn't actually necessarily need to be supplemented very much.
I think there are certain nutrients like B12, for example, depending on where you live. Vitamin D, I live in Canada. Of course, we don't get a lot of sunshine.
Right.
I think everyone here should probably be taking that. Yeah, I mean, really. It was sunny the last couple days. But basically, there are certain nutrients. I think stretching into K2, vitamin A, I don't think there's any good evidence for that. And carnitine as well, non-essential. And supplementation's actually been shown to lead to some carotid stenosis. People with genetically higher L-carnitine tend to have higher risk of cardiovascular disease as well, based on some Mendelian randomization. So, like looking at genetic levels. So I'd be concerned about supplementing with L-carnitine. But anyways, the point that I was making is that whether or not you need supplementation doesn't have a bearing on whether or not a diet is necessarily healthy. And what I care about are health outcomes. Is it going to lead to a heart attack? Is it going to lead to a stroke, cancer, etc.? It seemed like when we did the hypothetical, eventually we got agreement on that topic, the outcomes mattering the most. And yeah, I think there are certain supplements that are needed, and I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, so I want to move on to the next question. I want to ask you guys both a follow-up question on that because I don't understand.
Okay.
And I want to understand.
Go ahead.
I don't see how a diet could exist if it doesn't have the nutrients necessary for one to get to a healthy life. If you need supplements, then you can't live, meaning you can't avoid cardiovascular disease, you can't avoid cancer, and so on and so forth. So my confusion with that is not to disagree with you. It's genuinely that from my position, and I think from a lot of people who eat a carnivore-based lifestyle, the question is, well, if it needs supplements and you don't have access to supplements, then you'll die. So this concept of having a healthier life doesn't matter because you're not living. Whereas the argument on the other side is you don't need supplements, therefore tweak things along the way to adjust for that, but you are living. So, does that make sense?
So I mean, I think it's just worded a bit awkwardly, but I'll try to address that. So in a context where you have no access to supplementation or what have you, or fortified foods, like might be the case in some impoverished areas, yeah, I think that is problematic. I think in those cases, including some animal foods may actually be better insofar that it provides you with certain nutrients that you might not get otherwise, like B12. However, in a context where that is available to you, you're able to have fortified foods like I'm just assuming a lot of, at least my fan base, so to speak, who would be watching this largely in the U.S. and Canada, that they would have access to that. They'd be able to consume fortified foods. And when we look on a population level of people consuming these diets, whether that's with fortified foods or supplementation, we see that they do just fine as far as supplements, or as far as nutrient status, rather. So I don't see why that matters. In fact, even Anthony had agreed earlier that some people may need to supplement folate, for example, or at least worry about their intake and focus on specific foods for that if they have MTHFR variation or something, right? Like so there are cases on either side where that is something to be concerned about, but I don't see how that has bearing on health outcomes provided that you have access to it. Like B12, look, I pay $14 a year for my supplement. It's the once weekly high dose. Easy. It really doesn't have to be that much.
It's interesting that, I guess the question I would have, Dr. Nagra, is do you feel that based off of what you just expressed, is the diet that you're eating a vegan diet for those that are of the means? Or is it for all of humanity? You know what I mean? Like, is it for everyone, or is it for those that have the means?
I don't think any diet is necessarily I don't think every carnivore diet is for everyone either. I mean, there are people who live in places that literally rely on more plant foods and what they could grow locally. There's populations, I think I've seen you, Anthony, mention this, people in, Papua New Guinea who live on sweet potatoes largely. So yeah. I don't think you can say that about any diet.
And do very well. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's the thing is I don't think you can say that, but that's not necessarily who we're reaching here, right? I try to speak to those who we are reaching, those who have the choice. I think there's a major issue with the food system in that there are food deserts. There are issues with pricing of generally healthier foods, and I would throw these plant foods as well as some animal products into that ballpark over things like Oreo cookies and sugar sweetened beverages. And so there needs to be a food system shift to help subsidize healthier foods. Of course, my position on that would be more of the fruits and veggies and whatnot. We might have disagreements there, but I think that we would hopefully agree that there needs to be a larger shift at a higher level than just telling people what to eat, because not everybody has the means to do either of what we're recommending here. Yeah. And hopefully that's a point of common ground. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And look, I don't think that we're Dr. Baker said that he thinks that humans are really facultative carnivores, that we can eat an omnivorous diet, but we do well or better, with more meat. It is very true that people for a long time have done very well and had long, good, healthy lives eating a mixed diet, and that's fine, especially in areas that you don't have access to these other sort of things. I mean, that's really what is thought, that we did start switching over to plant foods, post-agricultural revolution, or because during the agricultural revolution, is because megafauna died out for one reason or another, and we didn't really have access to these things. Some places did, like the Native Americans in North America. They like the Plains Indians, they just ate buffalo. There's 100 million people that were supported on that sort of lifestyle, hunter-gatherer, but really hunter lifestyle. There was a study too that showed that they were, in the 1800s, they were the largest or tallest population on Earth. And typically, the average height of a population denotes the average health of a population. Now they are not. They have since shrunk down. They are much shorter now, and that's pretty quick. So that's about 150 years, since that changed, and their health has suffered tremendously as well. Now they have gone to the standard processed food, alcohol, sugar sort of diets, and no one here is arguing that that's a good idea. But it is just to say that they ate predominantly meat and did very, very well. There are other places that ate a mixture and did very, very well. There's other places like Papua New Guinea that ate a lot of plants, a lot of these yams, like 60 different kinds of yams. Do very well. And they eliminate, there's commonalities there, and Dr. Kenobi thinks that that's the commonality there, is that they've reduced their omega-6 down to 1 to 2%, and all these different populations that are all doing pretty well, very lean and healthy and low rates of disease, they all have that 1 to 2% omega-6 ratio. So, it's an interesting theory, but, there is commonality here.